Hey everyone, I'm Brandon Vinyard. I've been listing and selling bank foreclosures since 2002. In today's video, we're going to talk more about seller's closing cost. How does it work? If you buy a foreclosure in today's market, do you know exactly how the closing costs are going to work? Do you know what the seller is going to pay by default? If not, you better. And one thing you've got to remember, every corporate seller is going to be different. So if you bought a foreclosure years ago, do not assume it's going to be the same way today as it was before. These policies do change periodically, so make sure before you put an offer in on an REO foreclosure, especially through the MLS, know exactly what the seller is going to pay by default. This is very important. This can really affect your bottom line, and if you get hit by a couple of $1,000s at closing because you didn't understand exactly what the seller was going to pay and what they weren't going to pay, well, guess what? You just lost out in the very beginning of the purchase. So remember, every corporate seller is different. Okay, let's jump right into it. So how do closing costs work exactly when you buy a foreclosure? Okay, just remember one more time, every situation is going to be different. Make sure you know ahead of time what the seller's policies are and what they're going to pay as default. Now there's two main closing cost items in the state of Florida, which is what I'm going to talk about since I'm in Florida. The first is going to be your deed documentary stamp tax. Now you got to remember, in Florida we don't have state income tax, so revenues generated from the sale of real estate. And the deed doc stamps tax is going to be on every real estate purchase, no matter what kind of purchase, it's going to be on there. The second is going to be the owner's title policy, okay? And when I mean the owner's title policy, I mean basically the lump sum amount of the actual policy itself. Okay, so deed doc stamps. Now this is really important to remember, but it's very simple. The Florida deed transfer tax is also referred to as a documentary stamp tax. It applies to other real estate transfers, including mineral and timber rights, easements, and leasehold interest. The transfer tax is also due on deed in lieu transactions, contracts for deeds, and assignments of contracts. So the state of Florida has a lockdown. You're not transferring a piece of property in Florida without paying the deed doc stamps. And the good thing is, most REO sellers will pay this. Okay, not all of them, but most of them will pay the deed doc stamps. And this is important because it's one of the biggest chunks. Okay, so how do you calculate the deed doc stamps? Well, it's really pretty simple. And the bottom line is it's 70 cents per 100 units. So if a home has a sales price of $100,000, it's going to be $700 in deed doc stamps. Another way you can calculate it is purchase price times 0.007, and that's what you're going to end up paying, or the seller's going to pay in the deed doc stamps. If the sales price was $150,000, then your doc stamps are going to be $1,050. Another example, if your sales price was $250,000, your doc stamps are going to be $1,750. Okay, so it's really easy. 70 cents per 100 units of the sales price. All right, your owner's title insurance. Most, and I say most, REO sellers will pay the owner's title policy if, and only if, you choose and use their chosen attorney closing firm. And the way it works here in Florida, everything is titled in South Florida because all the major attorney firms that handle the foreclosures for the banks, they're all located in South Florida. So the banks use these companies to handle the evictions, then they use these companies to handle the title. They try to keep it in-house to make it easier and a smoother process. That's not always the case, but that's their goal. But I'm located in Northwest Florida. Nothing is titled or done here locally. If you use the bank, it's all done in South Florida. So that's one of the big differences. Up here, you're never going to have a local closing unless you pay for it and have the title done by a local company. If the bank handles it, it's going to be done out of South Florida. And I've been doing this for almost 20 years. I've never once in my entire career had a buyer buy a house or property without having owner's title. Don't even think about not getting it. But remember, if it's a bank property, majority of them are all going to pay this if you use their title company. Okay, so how is the title insurance calculated? This is a little bit different. So a home with a value of up to $100,000 here locally will get 0.0575 per 1,000 for the owner's policy only. So your first $100,000 is going to be $575. Homes that have a value from $100,001 to $1 million will get 0.05 per 1,000 and so on. So a sales price of $150,000, the policy is going to be $825. If the sales price is $250,000, the policy is going to be $1,325. Now remember, this is the owner title policy only. As you'll see in some example closing statements coming up, this is the policy only. There are other fees included, but this is the policy, okay? The owner's policy, and this is all this fee is, just for the owner's policy. Most REO banks, sellers, corporate sellers, will pay the deed doc stamps and the owner's policy if you use their title company. So they will pay the two main biggest items as it were a cash transaction. And this is the kicker, they'll never pay it if you use your own company. I see a lot of buyers, they like using a local company, they feel more comfortable and they don't mind paying. This is good in some situations, but in others it's not. Once a price starts getting up there, like above $100,000, above $200,000, it's a big chunk not to have the seller do the title and have them pay for it. So just remember, that's going to add up in closing costs, and it's going to add up quickly. So just make sure you understand it before you put the offer in, who's paying what. So let me give you an example of some sellers that will not pay deed doc stamps. So if you're an investor and you're looking at buying a foreclosure, or you're an owner occupant and you have foreclosures on your radar, just remember these corporate sellers are not going to pay these fees. So if you're financing the home, just remember this is going to be added closing costs. All the GSEs will not pay the deed doc stamps in Florida. And if you've seen any of my other videos, GSEs, that's your government entities, okay? On these transactions, it's going to be the buyer's responsibility to pay the deed doc stamps. And just remember, a government-sponsored enterprise, GSE, is a type of financial service corporation created by the United States Congress. And basically, it's Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. If you buy a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac property, they are not going to pay the deed doc stamps. They are what they call exempt from paying it, and they will not pay it. So here's a couple examples I want to show you of some real closing statements, the HUDs, and just some things I wanted to point out so you can see how it works in perfect example. First things first, you see my arrow here pointing to the $475 closing fee, buyer to service link. So this is a transaction where the buyers had the seller pay the closing costs. They had the seller pay the owner's title policy because they handled the closing. But what I want you to remember, and you're going to see this, and pay attention to it, all these title companies are going to charge a fee, okay? This fee right here is $475 because it's financing. That's a pretty good chunk. Even though the seller's paying the other fees for the closing to the seller, the $475 is just an added fee. Just pay attention to this. Even if you're paying cash, the seller's paying deed doc stamps and the owner's policy, you're still going to have fees charged by the seller's title company. So pay attention to these. Some of these kind of add up. I don't necessarily agree with them, but just pay attention because you're going to see them. And in this situation, this is just example, the owner's policy that the seller paid the $625. They also paid the other fees involved, which is $209 for the lien search, updated fees, title search fee, closing fee. They pay all that when you utilize their services. And here's an example of the seller paying the deed doc stamps. You see this one was $770. but it's a debit from the seller, so the seller is paying it for the buyer. And this is an example of a buyer choosing their own title company. The sellers will pay nothing towards title charges, okay? I mean, they'll pay nothing. So if you utilize your own local company, wherever you are, the seller is not going to pay any of these costs. They're not going to pay the title insurance. They're not going to pay the lien search, wire fees, all that little stuff you see on this example. They're not going to pay. But on this example, they did pay the deed doc stamps right here, $414.40. So they did pay the deed doc, but this buyer chose their own title company, and that's why these fees all add up. So just remember, if you're an agent and you're having your client choose their own title company, they're going to get hit with all these fees. So just make sure that you add them up and they understand what their total cost is going to be. It's really important. Okay, let me end with a couple of key points here, just to kind of recoup for you. Remember, all banks are different. Don't assume. Pay attention to the GSC sellers, your Fannie Mae and Freddie Macs. If you're putting an offer on one of those, they're not going to pay. Go into it thinking, even if you're financing, that you're paying cash, and think about the closing cost as it was a cash transaction. Corporate sellers are never going to pay buyer-lender fees unless it's strictly negotiated. Use the seller's title company and they pay for the owner's title insurance policy. Okay, remember that. Use them, they pay. Use your own company, you pay everything. It's really important to remember because this is all going to affect your bottom line cost. Make sure you understand before you put your offer in what the costs are going to be. That way, that can also help you adjust your offer and make sure that your bottom line is what you understand it to be. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit the subscribe button. I appreciate it. If you have any questions, leave them below. I'll be glad to answer them. As always, have a great day and thanks.